Welcome, everybody, to the American Space Museum. I'm Marquette, and we're so glad you're with us to stay curious. Special shows, two special guests. Yes, this is our 1000th episode by some of my ciphering. Had to take my shoes off, of course, to finalize it. But we're so proud that our museum has been able to reach out to everybody for the past 4 years, born out of the pandemic, with this humble little program that has brought truly titans of the American space program right here to sit beside me. And I mean Terry White over here and Gary Allgire, two great guys that not only were important to their jobs of in the Apollo program for Gary and later the shuttle, and then Terry in the shuttle, but how they keep spreading the word and talking to people. Gary, you're an awesome docent here and that's how I met you. And Terry, you're always doing outreach with stuff. And so welcome to the 1000th episode of this little program started on my cell phone on March 23rd, March 23rd, 2020, when our museum closed down because of the COVID pandemic.
Well, it's an honor to be here for your 1000th episode.
Speak up, everybody, because we don't want people saying I can't hear Gary until we get him wound up there. But thank you. No, it is. You know, I can't even plan stuff like this.
Yeah, I second that opinion. It's an honor to be. It was a great honor to work in our nation's space program, but then as a way to come back and answer questions for people and talk about the experiences we had as being part of those launch teams for both Apollo and shuttle. So.
Well, everybody knows I'm a kid in a candy store when I have space workers around me. That's what our museum for over 20 years has celebrated, being the birthplace of America's space age right here in this museum. We had I've been very busy today and kind of behind the eight ball. We had a crew here from Florida's Hidden Treasures that's going to be on PBS, and Eric Street's here watching it. He was the asking me questions. I walked in a little late today at 11 o'clock because I can. And about 11:10, someone told me Eric's here with his cameraman, Clay. And about 3 o'clock, we finished up. So, they enjoyed the museum, and I got nothing done to prepare for today's show. Terry showed up here. Don't even know why you showed up. Gary was the docent today, and I said I'm gonna haul you two guys behind the camera, and let's just talk about how important it is for one, Americans to understand the pride in these space programs is seen around the world, and our ability to share that here at the American Space Museum with you in our artifacts in the museum, with the handprints of astronauts in bronze at our Spaceview Park, and then our humble little Stay Curious show. It's something I never envisioned my life would be like at this point in time, but it's truly a God-given talent to me that we're able to do this. So I'll let you say something about 1,000 episodes and how you've been involved.
Well, I've been involved, since Apollo 6, which I came in 1968 out of college. Never expected to ever work on the moon program. And here I was having an opportunity to do exactly that. And so it was a fun career for me all the way through Apollo, and then working on the space shuttle all the way through that until I retired.
Both these gentlemen have been with us 2 years when I kind of corralled them into helping us. Gary has one of the most popular shows of the year, his Apollo 1 episode talking about the fire in a very pragmatic and engineering way, I think has never been done before. And we've had over 500 views of that. Yes, we know other people have podcasts out there that have thousands of views, and we hope that one day you all will realize and share with your friends the kind of people we're bringing here that no one else is. Some of these other podcasts, they read what's on social media and in the news and so forth, and then spend a week giving their elaborate scenarios of stuff. You all know very much that I'm pretty much on the fly and in motion all the time with other duties I have here at the museum. But unbelievably, we can't believe how popular this has become, and we hope it becomes more popular.
It's well deserved because you do a good job. But I like the looks on your face when some of the things I tell you, you look at me like I never envisioned that. I never heard of that. How do you know that?
Right. And like, let's get the broom crew together here and go out and put those landing gear up and so forth like that. But what I like bringing about, guys, is the human aspect of it. You guys are great guys. You're family men. You've raised families. You paid mortgages, bought cars, this and that and the other, and like we've talked many times, the astronauts get a lot of the accolades, and they're at the tip of the spear. But it's truly space workers like Terry and Gary that are why NASA is what it is. And we'll talk about a few things like that as we freewheel today. I'm not even going to show one slide of anything. Got Selvin Trotter on the board here today. Marty Winkle, my co-producer for over 990 shows. I think he's only missed about 10. He's watching a baseball game, spring training with his brother. And so I love that for him in there. So if you got some questions for these two guys, Selvin will, you can ask them on the UCAC family microphone there, Selvin. But I thought we'd talk a little bit about some current events and current events of the moon. And you helped us go to the moon, Gary, and working for the Apollo program. We've had 4 recent missions to the moon, unmanned. Russia crashed. The Japanese Space Agency landed and then tipped over. We've got Intuitive Machines, landed a little bit hot, and they tipped over. But India had a very perfect mission on there. And so did China. China has been 2 for 2. They landed spacecraft on the backside of the moon. They even have a satellite that they won't share with us that can communicate with the backside of the moon. And then they landed an orbiter in one of my favorite places on the moon to look through a telescope, Mons Rumker. It's a lava dome there, and they brought back material from that.
Oh, did they?
Okay.
Yeah,
good.
they actually brought back, China's brought back, I think, almost a half a pound of moon rocks on 2 missions. So the moon's very much alive, but as we see with the partial success of Intuitive Machines, this is hard stuff. And I think my criticism of the current crop of NASA people in the promotional world is they make it look like a video game that we're just going to do it and land. Yeah. When these missions, 4 and one very successful and the other 2 not, prove that, don't they?
Yes. And people don't realize really how hard it was for us to even land on the moon back in the 60s. I mean, the 60s generation, just to do that, and the attention to detail that we went through to make sure that happened correctly, and we didn't lose anything. But today, they are making some mistakes that they should have learned that we did when we went through all that.
Yeah, I didn't mention the Peregrine lander didn't even get to the moon because they had a valve stuck on a simple...
That is a known problem. They have known those kind of problems for years. They have a valve that's right there at the edge of the tank. There's one for the hydrogen, for the fuel, and one for the oxidizer. And they have a known tendency to leak. And they'll leak down, and what happened is it leaks. So what we've been doing to get around that is they have 2 valves. They have one at the end of the tank, and then they have another valve right there as it goes into the engine. And so what they do is they open up both. But if one leaks, they have a backup to keep it from going into space. One of the problems they had on one of the Mars missions is they only had one valve, and either the fuel or oxidizer didn't make any difference. It started leaking, and it went down and then crossed over and went back up the line towards the other tank. So when they opened it up to fire the engine, the actual 2 fuels met in the fuel line and blew up.
Wow.
And they lost that vehicle. But it took them a while to figure that out. But it's something that we knew from the Apollo program, that you don't have just a single point on a valve because they do leak.
And that's one of the sad things about it is there's lessons learned in one program that they don't always carry those lessons learned over to the next program.
And there's also the payload people have the same issues that we had on the Apollo or on a shuttle, is the budgets. You have a limited budget, and they do get cut back. So to save the mission, they will cut back on either the testing or they'll cut back on the drawings, but something gets cut back so that they can make the mission. And sometimes that is a mistake.
Terry, sitting back in your armchair watching these assault on the lunar South Pole, where we say water is in some form. What do you think about it?
Well, we need to do more of this with the unmanned ones and learn a lot more about the moon before we actually send crews to live on the moon. It's one thing to do like we did with the Apollo moon landings, where they're only there for a few days, like a weekend camping trip. But when we go back, they need to learn to live on the moon, and you need to do a lot with robotics to set that scenario up. But you can't do everything with robotics. Look at Apollo 11. When they were fixing to set down on the moon, it was a bad location. Armstrong said we'd have never got back off if we'd have sat down in the initial landing spot. So he took over control and by hand flew the lunar lander to a safer spot to land. Now, would a unmanned lander go ahead and do that and abort to a different landing site, or would it go ahead and land there and then realize, oh, well, we can't get back off?
Well, a case in point, there's something in the news today that I'm going to recap, hopefully on a future Stay Curious, is the Ingenuity helicopter on Mars that everybody was so transfixed with, was guaranteed to, is only going to have 5 missions, 5 flights. And but it lasted into 70 flights beyond it could be. And they have determined that it crashed down and its wing hit, and it actually tore off one of the wings.
They tore the tip off of one of the blades for the
No, they
rotors.
found out now the whole rotor came
rotor
off
was
on the
okay.
other one, because they found it laying beside it when Perseverance went over close to it, about a quarter mile away.
Right. Okay.
But it's in a dune field, and they were saying that this computer generated intelligence to see spots to land and so forth was fooled by the sand dunes. It actually had its anomaly, this Mars helicopter, over the sand dunes of Mars, where there wasn't relief to be seen, or craters or rocks and so forth, and that it got confused on there. Now this Intuitive Machines lander supposedly was taking photographs from several of its passes of the landing site and matching those photos with its then real landing on there, much like backyard telescopes today you can buy. Just throw it out there, it starts taking pictures of the sky and matches them up with its database, and bingo, you've got a GPS, so to speak, telescope that'll go wherever you want to go to it. So they learned that this AI intelligence for mapping fooled this helicopter because it was over sand dunes where it couldn't get any relief data there. So
Interesting.
we have any questions, Selvin?
We do. Matt Pike wants to know from all 3 of you, what do you normally use for stargazing, and what's your favorite target?
What do we use for stargazing? Well, all kinds of telescopes. And Matt, we appreciate that question. I do backyard astronomy once a month on there. But I have several telescopes because I've had them for a long time. You might want to use a refractor. The lens type for looking at planets seems to be the best way to look at planets in the moon, with a refractor spyglass type. And then the mirror type are good for seeing the faint fuzzies, we call them, the nebulas and galaxies on there. So do you guys have telescopes?
No, I always wanted one, but I never have.
But you still can.
I know.
Yeah, and there, Terry?
No, I look at them with my eyes.
All right, look at it with your eye.
And
when I show up with a telescope.
Yeah, and I go out and look at space station when it's coming over, and when the orbiters were flying, I'd go out and look at an orbiter in space. I'd look at Mir when it was coming over. So, yeah.
Well, that's a good point. You don't need a telescope to be a stargazer, Matt, and just go out in your backyard. There's an app for the constellations, learn all them. A lot of people are into the mythology, Greek and Roman mythology, that these stories are up there.
And there's a website that you can go in there and find out when these things are flying over, like the International Space Station's coming over your house where you can see it. It's got to be weather permitting, but yeah, they'll tell you.
Mm-hmm.
And the best time to watch it is early in the morning because, well, it's still dark in my yard. The sun is already shining on something that's up in space since it's so far up, and you could see Mir coming over. You could see the International Space Station coming over because they're lighting up with the sun's reflection long before you can see the sun.
That's right. Selva's got another question.
Got Eric Street here with us from Florida Hidden Treasures. And can you tell us what happens if astronauts lose things on the space shuttle while in space?
They lose.
What happens if they lose something? If they can't locate something that they had that they took out and can't put it back?
Are you talking on a spacewalk, Eric, or inside the space station?
Inside the space station.
Oh, that's a
Inside
huge.
the space station or inside the space shuttle is most of them that I had to research in that. And we had a lost and found category, so they had to declare, they had length of time to look for that item. But if they had something got away from them, they misplaced it or lost it, and it wasn't there in the shadow box to stow away at the end of their flight, then when it came back, we had so many days to go look for that. If we dropped something while we were working on it, we only had so many hours to locate it. But they had a while to locate it, but then they would say, okay, well, and we would write up a lost and found, and then sometimes we would tell them, yes, we found it, but you said you didn't lose this part. So now they said, well, just send it to us. I said, nope, the answer now is it's been documented. So you have to go through all the paperwork to state that you lost it. And now that we found it. So
Now, the Apollo program, I don't recall any lost and found. I do recall twice, once on the lunar module and once on the command module, that we had cockroaches crawl into the spacecraft.
Right, yes.
And we spent many, many hours and probably days trying to find those cockroaches that crawled in. We've had candy bars put in there to see if they could catch them with that way. But as far as I know, we never did really find them.
You can YouTube that with Bob Seek and Ernie Rios talking about the lost cockroach in the Apollo 12 command module. They found a leg of it.
Yeah.
They even tried little ramps into a beer can.
Yeah.
All right, to try and
Try to
tease them
find
into there. Yeah. So did a cockroach go to the moon? Maybe.
Maybe.
The
The other thing is occasionally on Apollo, when they opened up a compartment and a screw or nut would fall down in there and they couldn't retrieve it, they couldn't see it. And to fix that, we would take glue and squirt glue down in there, assuming that the glue would cover the lost item and keep it glued there instead of floating around in space.
see, we never had that scenario. We did have stuff that we documented as lost. Sometimes it was tools, and I would really get involved if somebody lost something, or even dropping a washer, But and then we'd research and couldn't find it, and then the engineer would say, well, how far we have to tear the vehicle apart looking for it, and then what's the scenario if we don't find it? What could potentially happen? And we address all that, and we would fly with some of that stuff, and then 2 flights later it would show up. So it had drifted around, but and I still have a ring that we retrieved out of one of the orbiters after a flight, and no one ever claimed the ring. And so so
That's interesting. Charlie Duke's ring came out of the spacecraft, I believe, and hit his helmet or somebody's helmet.
Wow.
Yeah, there's his wedding ring came out of his personal kit, or some astronaut did. Maybe someone will correct me on that. But yes, losing things. I topped off the antifreeze in my Jeep and took the pressure cap off, and then spent an hour looking for it. I knew I set it there, okay, and I'm looking all over the engine and I can't find it. It wasn't, so when I get frustrated like that, I just say, just go inside and chill out and come back out and it'll pop out there. Well, it wasn't until I got underneath the Jeep and looked out and it had flopped into a little piece of the bodywork hanging there, type of thing. But I even went over the curb a few times to try to get it out there. So you can lose stuff everywhere, can't you, there? And we know that some astronauts have lost tools on spacewalks.
Yes, they have. Yes, they
a
have.
bag, but those would be in there. You're leaving, Eric. Thank you, buddy.
Thank you.
You're welcome. We hope to see the American Space Museum on the Florida Hidden Treasures program.
Thank you, guys.
You're welcome.
Yeah, we actually had a piece float around on, I believe it was Atlantis was in flight and wedged between the structure and the window. And it stayed there. They couldn't retrieve it. It came back and we couldn't retrieve it. Of course, the configuration changed when we got back into gravity and that. And potentially we would have to disassemble a lot of the crew module. And luckily enough, by using the right techniques, we managed to retrieve that item. So,
Selvin, I see you're changing the names there. I was there a little bit on our speakers there. Let's see. Yeah, there's my name there. Let me open up this can of worms, so to speak. Let's talk a minute about both these gentlemen. Let's talk about Artemis. And both these gentlemen are very experienced in their craft. Gary's going between the two major programs, Apollo and Shuttle, and of course Terry with the Shuttle since 1979, correct?
Correct.
In there. So Artemis wants to go to the moon, and let me just ask you first, Terry, what do you think about it? We keep pushing it back.
Yeah,
but
Artemis is still struggling, and as I don't work in the program, I don't know the details of to what their issues are. But they don't have a lot of confidence in the way it's going right now, and it is being expensive. And history tells us something's really expensive. If it gets way out of schedule, then they have a habit of canceling the whole program. So.
Gary, we're in a moon race with China, though.
Yes, and it's baffling to me because basically we're just having a modified shuttle program and Apollo program put together. We're using basically the same concept as a tank, the orange tank for fuel, for hydrogen and oxygen. We're using the same main engines, at least at the very beginning, that we used on the shuttle. We're using the same solid rocket motors, except we've added an extra segment into it. So that's all repeated. And the Orion spacecraft is just a larger version of the Apollo spacecraft. Mm-hmm. So it's a little confusing for me why, since we've really just taken what we've already learned how to use, and it's taken longer to do that than we did in the original programs.
And what's ill-defined is the vehicle that we're going to land on the moon.
Oh, that's terrible.
It's touted that it's going to be the Starship. It's 200 feet above the surface, landing on its tail. And also Blue Origin and a consortium have built an Apollo lunar module on steroids that to me seems the most logical because you can put a lot of payload on there before you send astronauts there. But it seems convoluted, but also Grumman was behind in the Apollo program with their lunar module. So building something on the fly that you think is going to go to the moon like Starship is not out of the parameters of NASA's thinking. But it just seems like here we had a little lander, Intuitive Machines, that apparently was going 6 miles an hour horizontally and 2 miles an hour down. In that little bit of side motion, it must have caught one of its.
They had 5 landing gear on it, which is what they originally had concepted for the lunar module, and got away from that, just went to 4. And so as it came on, it hadn't zeroed out the horizontal velocity. So as it came down, one of the little legs caught on the moon surface and caused it to fall over. Luckily, it fell over on an outcropping, so it's not totally flat on the moon, but it's kind of off the moon a little bit.
The experiments were on the top. Apparently, today's the last day that it can work because of where it's at on the moon. It was only going to have 7 days of daylight. The main solar panel is the one that and the antenna. That's the problem, is we're not seeing fabulous pictures and so forth. Is the antennas actually in the moon regolith, and they've worked around. I bet they've had to use the lunar orbiter, reconnaissance orbiter, as a relay station. Would you think?
They could be doing that.
With
I
the
don't
lunar,
know the combination of antennas that they had on there versus like what we had on the moon. We had 2 or 3 different ways of communicating from the lunar module to the command module in orbit, and then from there they could also either go from the lunar module to Earth to communicate, or they could go through the command module to communicate back to Earth.
So they had to go through the command module several times in their communications.
Yeah.
Well, so the bottom line is, do you think Artemis is going to be fulfilled? Now they've moved the 3,000 waving at the moon from 3,000 miles away. Artemis 2 is now scheduled for September 2025, technically, with the landing coming a year later in late 2026. Meanwhile, China has announced the names of their lunar spacecraft. All right, and
the astronauts are going to land on the moon.
And they fully intend to probably by 2030 land on the moon. But China's got a big robotic assault on the South Pole, where they actually want to land a spacecraft that will automatically make Lego-like bricks out of the lunar regolith and the water it finds there. It's kind of building habitats before we send people there.
Again, you got to build a structure.
I mean, it just smacks to me like America's behind.
Well,
How about you guys?
They're overcomplicated. The return to the moon is extremely complicated. I worry about it that we had the lunar module, as really a lifeboat. And for Apollo 13, we proved that was a very good idea to have the lunar module because it saved the astronauts from perishing when we blew the oxygen tank. Orion doesn't have any backup. If it's flying to the moon and something fails, I don't know what they're going to do. There's some stuff that they're supposed to put in orbit around the moon that they would dock with before they'd actually go down onto the moon. It's to me, it's very overcomplex and not really thought out.
And we'll see. There's also management people that are from the shuttle and Apollo era that don't like that there's not many engineers in the top tier of this management structure of the Artemis program.
Well, that's how it's managed, basically. You have good engineers back at the manufacturing plants. I'll have to admit that, my involvement going out to Downey, California during the Apollo program and on the shuttle program and Palmdale, meeting the engineers that are working on the program have been excellent. And even when I went out to some of the other contractors, like Boeing, some of the things that they did, McDonnell, when I went to their plants, one of the most interesting places I went to was Ball Brothers in Boulder, Colorado. They built the retention latches, the active retention latches for the shuttle. It was designed by a gentleman at Rockwell, but they couldn't build it. By contract, they had to sub that out.
Really?
So they subbed it out to Ball Brothers, the company that makes the mason jars.
Yeah, really?
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah, that was interesting. But they had an engineer that was very equivalent to the design engineers that down Rockwell had. They were impressive. Same thing with Spar going up to Toronto with people who made the RMSs, the remote manipulator system. They were excellent people also. So
yeah, at that time they had the best program. But yeah, and people don't realize that. But a big government contract like the shuttle or Apollo is, every congressman that voted for it, they wanted a piece of the pie for their state. So a lot of this stuff was subbed out. There was a prime contractor, but it was subbed out to that. And the orbiter itself was built in 48 of our 50 states.
Selvin, I can't find Gary's name on the bottom there.
It's P.
What?
P.
Oh,
Paul.
yeah,
He's a
well, I see mine, Terry's. Oh, Gary's.
Yeah.
Okay, there we are, Gary there. Well, we had a program called Constellation that got mothballed. That had a successful flight of the Orion spacecraft 12 years ago with solid fuel single stick rocket. The Ares rocket. That was going to be the way to go. Now we've gotten complicated again with the liquid fuel and the side boosters. I mean, the bottom line, you guys think we're going to have boots on the ground through Artemis, or is it going to have to be something else?
personally, I think it's going to be somebody else. I think if SpaceX under Elon Musk would probably succeed quicker than NASA can do it.
Hmm.
They're kind of bogged down with their management.
What do you think, Terry?
And the same thing, and again, it's a matter of funding it. People don't realize all the benefits they got from space. If you could take them the benefits away for 1 hour, they'd be willing to support money-wise for the space program. But someone like Musk and Bezos, they've got the money and they're willing to spend the money to go do that. So yeah, there's is not the cost factor that it is for NASA, and NASA spends a lot of money on other things besides spacecraft. So.
Aeronautics is the part of it that I emphasize, and that's why our jet flying is so safe in our country today.
Yeah.
The money to the aeronautics, we haven't had a major passenger airline crash in decade, probably.
Quite a while since
Knock on wood, but
Boeing 737 was the last for us.
Well, it's fascinating to look and see how this is going to play out. I want to interject this one fact from the Apollo that I thought was very interesting. Somebody sent me a link to every quarter. Marshall Space Center had a recap of the Saturn rockets, where they were at. Every 3 months was a 30-minute video on where we stand now with this. Okay, and in 66, right there, 65 at the end of the Gemini program, they actually had a problem with storage of the Saturn 1B rockets. They had 12 of them built.
Yeah.
In 1965 or 60, they had 12 of them built. The final stage of the Saturn V rocket. They took the 12th one and made the orbital workshop out of it. Okay. But they had pictures of, we have to find a place to store these because, or build another facility for them. So this is 1964, 65, 4 years before the first landing, even before the first launch in 1968 of a Saturn V, or 66 would have been the first one, right? But so they've not even rolled the metal for Artemis 3.
Yeah.
How can you have a moon program? Like, we had a moon program there. The money was going to go to it, and they had the hardware lined up to go in there. And today we don't have the money, and the future spacecraft and so forth are not even. They're still on drawing boards.
Yes.
The problem is the price has gotten so high. The management keeps wanting to redesign, come up with new ways to do something, and so it slows the program down. And I have no excuse for why we don't have what we did back in the Apollo program, because we stored a lot of the third stages and of the Saturn V and a few of the second stage that were in the VAB, hidden in the bays that we didn't use.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Huh.
We did that with external tanks.
Yeah, external
Well,
tanks.
Yeah, when we were busy, external tanks would be stored up high in the VAB for when we needed them.
Yep, they were there.
You got to have the hardware in place to fulfill these dreams.
And we had that problem throughout the shuttle program because, like he said, Apollo had all kinds of spare parts available, and it was an expendable rocket. Okay, now the shuttle was a reusable one, and we had no spares. They didn't even build it into the program, so there was very limited spare parts.
Well, we're freewheeling here today without any slides. Our 1000th episode, according to my ciphering. Our first episode was March 23rd, 2020, when we closed the museum, and I told my executive director, Karan Conklin, we can't let these people that give us thousands of dollars a year know that we're just going to lay down. We could possibly close, and let me try this Facebook Live where we could talk about some of our artifacts in there. And of course, I've been a speaker for decades in the astronomy community, and this comes very second nature to me, to interview people and put my face out there, and with all my errors and everything. All right. And I'm sure somebody's pointing out today that I said something wrong, but Selvin, if you got some questions from our comments there from our viewers, let us have them.
I have something from Peggy Hubert that's kind of cute. Do you remember the first time you saw a flying machine? How old were you? And along the same lines, when was the first time you flew?
When was the first
I think
machine?
in airplane, I think
Airplanes.
she's saying.
Oh, first time I flew in an airplane, I flew in a private airplane when I was in high school in Columbus, Ohio. A friend of mine, neighbors, his dad designed aircraft for North American Aviation. He built experimental aircraft in his garage at home, and I would go down there and help him assemble the aircraft and that, especially laying up the wings because it took multiple hands to do that. But he had his own plane, and I don't even remember the model of it, but it looked like Sky King's airplane.
All right.
Yeah, and he ran a
That's
little
an old one,
airport.
Sky King.
Yeah, he ran a little airport, and he'd go down there and say, "Hey, we're going to fly up to Akron, or we're going to fly over to Indiana. You want to go along?" And I'd just go down there with him, and we'd fly somewhere for the day. So yeah.
My first flight was back when I was in high school. I had joined the Air Explorers, which is like the Explorer group, but it was associated with the airline industry, and we have meetings in the Ozark Airlines in St. Louis at the airport. And my first flight was to fly on that, and we were going to an air show, and we would land, and we would stand around and guard the airplane we flew in, and it was a DC-3. Now this DC-3 that Ozark Airlines owned was the third production off the production line DC-3 that was still flying back in the 60s.
And
Well,
DC-3s are still flying today. They fly
Really?
in South America, and they fly a lot of them in Alaska.
Well, as for me, my dad was a crazy experimental aviation guy, and I actually helped rib stitch the wings on his 1942 Taylor craft
Okay.
that he restored. And my mom always thought there should be a car in the garage instead of an airplane. Yeah, and I didn't have it. I get air sick. I'm not an aviator type person. I like keeping my feet on the ground. So thank you for that question, Selvin. Anything else?
And
on people's
Sullivan,
minds?
that was my sister. She's
Oh,
with
was it?
She lives in Wendover. She's with the FAA, so
Oh, okay.
expect her to ask an aviation question.
Well, thank you. Tell Rebecca and,
Well, this was
and
the-
Travis that their dad's on today. We
Yeah,
love them
I
watching.
sent him a message, but Travis is 6 hours ahead of us. He's over in Germany.
All right.
So,
What else, Selvin?
Got one from Tom Uziak, and he says the Russians used the same basic Soyuz rocket for many years. Do you think we should have kept the Saturn V and modified it and upgraded it over the years, or at least the Saturn 1B?
There was some talk about that during the early shuttle programs that have refly the Saturn V. It never came about. The Apollo spacecraft was very limited as far as what it could do and go to the moon. And actually, just the Congress got tired of it. The American public were tired of the moon program. It just wasn't as popular as it was. And so it was time to move on to something different and bigger. And that's when NASA came up with the concept of, instead of throwing all these rockets away, launching satellites, we could have one vehicle that could be reused, and we could use all that to launch our satellites. In fact, during the first area of the age of the shuttle, when it was flying, Congress dictated to the Delta program, rocket program, to destroy all of their tooling. So, because we were never going to use a Delta rocket anymore. I don't know if the Atlas program was given that same, but Delta was twice told to destroy the tooling for building those vehicles. Luckily, they didn't destroy them. And so the shuttle was no longer flying. We still used the Deltas.
Astronaut Mike Baker has been on our program, and he was the NASA liaison for about 6 years to Russia when we were paying Russia $40 million a seat to launch up there. Katie Coleman and who else went up there? A couple astronauts that went on Soyuz spacecraft.
It's been quite
I'm
a few.
thinking Ron Anyway, he said this about his knowledge with Russia. If it's good enough, it's good enough. They're not going to change it. And they've not changed the basic design of the Soyuz spacecraft in 40 years, except upgrading some of the modern computerization of it. But they're very much set in, if it works, why change it?
You look at their military aircraft, the same thing too. It's pretty rudimentary. I mean, it's, you look at it and say that this is nothing really exotic or fancy about it. And I haven't been in any of their spacecraft, but I understand the same things. And they, the Russian workers that I've been associated with, they couldn't understand the things we do. I mean, we use tie wraps to secure our high pressure hoses and stuff with weights and all that. They use rags, and they tie them, and then they untie them and use the rag again for the next time they're doing it. I mean, it's
Wow.
Yeah, they just couldn't understand. So.
Well, they did develop a prototype of their moon lander. You can find those on display, but they did have one where the cosmonauts would land, at least one would land on the moon while one was still circulating the moon. And they were using, the Soyuz spacecraft was designed originally to go to the moon. Wouldn't land, but they would have another lander under Sergei Korolov's tutelage when he wanted to go to the moon while he was still alive.
Yeah, that LK-1 was hidden in history for a long time. Their moon lander, basically like a phone booth to land on the moon and go out. And the cosmonaut may have just been on the moon one orbit.
Yeah, a couple hours, and that was it.
Yeah, it's a 2-hour orbit around the moon, and when he landed, they were going to try to get up as quick as they could. But of course they didn't, and then lost interest in it.
Well, they lost interest when Korolev died.
Right.
And that was the end of the program. And he has stated he ordered 14 of his N-1 rockets to be built. And they, due to the process of how they developed their rockets, they would know that they would launch it, would blow up, and they would continue to do that until they would correct everything. And he actually planned and stated that it would be his 13th and 14th rocket that would land on the moon, which put it way back into mid-70s, late 70s, if that had occurred. And by then, we'd already landed on the moon, so there was no emphasis to continue on after he passed away.
That kind of sounds like Elon Musk and his Falcon 9 that had 18 failures of it until they stuck the landing on the 19th or 20th one. And we just had the 288th landing of a Falcon 9 rocket the other day.
We'll learn from our mistakes. We learn more from our mistakes than we do from our accomplishments.
And Dr. Goddard had the same approach back when he just started developing liquid fuel rockets. Is he knew every failure was something he would learn from. And it took him quite a while before he launched that first one in 1926.
We love talking about Goddard, died in 1945 of throat cancer.
Yes.
Never got to see the fruitions. If he would have had the money, I'm convinced he could have orbited something in 1937.
He tried to get the United States government involved because he knew what was happening in Germany under von Braun, because he had the German country backing him, the Nazi party. And so he was trying to get that information. He would go to Congress and beg, hey, this is what's going to be happening. And they ignored him. So the only money he had was what Charles Lindbergh was able to get going to the Guggenheim family to give him the money to continue developing his rockets.
That's correct. We, Marty particularly, and I love talking about Robert Goddard. Selvin.
Yes, sir.
Another question or comment from anybody?
Well, the last comment was, question, I'm sorry. Hi, gentlemen, do you think America's Mars mission would suffer if the seemingly likely event we lose the moon race? That's from Neldis Tacos.
Well, that's a hard. I can't look into the future very much, but it would be a concern. Of course, going to the moon is a stepping stone, and that's something I always believed, even when we got the word they were canceling the moon program in Apollo 17, that it was a stepping stone to go further on to Mars or further out. And I just didn't see, for me personally, we would go directly to Mars without going to the moon first to get a little bit better understanding what it would take to fly these long duration missions.
And learn how to live out
Yes,
there.
yeah.
Yes.
We
It's
have
not just going there for a few days, but you're going to have to go because
Yeah.
of the length of time to get to Mars and back. You're going to have to go live there for a couple of years. So.
And I really think the part of the living that's understated is food. How are we going to keep people nourished? And most of you've seen the movie The Martian, and of course that's a big part of it. If it wasn't for potatoes, he wouldn't have been able to live, supposedly on there. And I have talked to some of our astro food people like Gary Stute, who's been on here, and we'll have Gary back. He keeps saying that too. He can't get the attention of anybody to say, look, how are you going to eat in space?
Yeah, they're growing stuff on space station, but not enough to feed
Yeah.
people for a long period. So they're looking at ways to suspend you, just like when a bear hibernates.
Really?
It doesn't eat, it doesn't drink, it doesn't defecate. So, all those things on that, it goes, slows its heart rate down. So they're trying to figure out a way that they can do that with people, or basically cryogenics and freeze you and then wake you up when you get there. So, yeah, those are all things they're looking at because it's months, especially coming home. It's a lot longer trip
Well,
coming home.
Going to the Mars is, I think, a couple of years to get there at the speeds that we can physically achieve at
Yes.
this time.
9 months there.
9 months. And what I like to point out, if you come to the museum here, we have a scale model of the Earth hanging from the ceiling. And if you look at the far end of that room, there's a scale model of the moon, and that represents 240,000 miles.
No, 1/10 the distance.
Huh?
That
1/10?
actually that
I was
is
told.
actually
Oh.
1/10 of the distance, 25 feet.
Oh, okay.
And on that scale, it's 1,000 miles an inch.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, that represents the 240,000
yeah,
miles.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And then we asked the people, where would Mars be? And they say, well, maybe at the end of the building or down the block. I said, no, it would be 1 mile
Yeah,
past that point.
1 mile past
That's
this.
how far Mars would be in relationship.
3 days to get to the moon. All right, and 3 days back. That's why the Gemini programs
It's 8
push
days.
the envelope up
Yeah.
there, and then you're going to be a day or two around the moon, and keeping the food, the nutrition, and your psychological well-being.
Well, for the moon program, the exercising, they didn't have much area to do any exercising like we do on the space station,
Mhm.
because your body, after you lose your muscle tone, and that's one of the kind of a negative towards freezing, putting people to sleep, because their body will muscles will
Correct.
will go
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's
So
a
they
lot
have-
of things associated with it.
with
yeah.
that. So you got to keep that very, very active. And they spend a lot of time on orbit working every day with doing exercises to
2
maintain.
hours or so.
yeah.
And the other thing they're finding is difficult, getting a crew that can sustain a long period of time with each other. It is. It
True.
is. They're doing studies where they select people and, basically on all the things they put them through. Yes, these half a dozen people can work together in that. I understand they have a facility on a mountain in Hawaii that outside of it is a lot of old lava in that. So it replicates, another planet in that. But they're in a structure there and you can't leave.
Yeah.
If you want to go outside, there is a way, but you have to suit up and go outside for a few minutes. But they're finding out that even though they analyze all these people, they can get together. After a couple of months, they're saying, hey, you got to get that guy out of here. He has to go.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, once in a while, I think you guys have been married a long time, but once
Not
in a while,
together.
not together. Yeah. Clear that. Once in a while, you might get under your spouse's gall once in a while.
That's why
there.
they have outside.
Yeah, that's why they have outside, and
Yeah.
and you can't when you're, everybody with people you love have little things that happen, and how do you deal with it? Well, you go. I'm going to watch TV in that room and chill out or whatever. There's a lot of human conditions here that they just want everyone to be robotics and just do.
And the shuttle crews, they became a family when you talk to them about it because of the training periods they went through and that, and they missed their own family and that, but they became a family. But if you grew up in a family, especially one that had multiple kids, no matter that your family, you still have a difficult time getting along with everybody all the time. You have your days and you have your nights, and you have get him out of here for a while.
Selma, we have any other questions?
I
Because
do have an interesting one.
I've got a fun way that we're going to end our 1000th episode here with these two stellar guests of ours.
Gary Jeriel wants to know from each of you, where do you see NASA in 25 years from now?
Great question, Gary Gerald.
NASA has always anticipated to get out of the day-to-day operations, which is what you're seeing today. I was part of the first part of that. I was a branch chief, and our division was dissolved because they were going to turn it over to the contractor. And that was the study that Booz Allen did back in the Apollo days. NASA says, how are we going to structure NASA in the future? Should we be NASA employees be doing all the work, or should be contractors be doing the work instead, or should we do a combination like we did for the Apollo and early shuttle? And that's sat on the books for years, and finally they started implementing it, and NASA wanted to turn the day-to-day operations over to the private industry, and that's where they're heading, and that's where we've been going, and that's what we're seeing here out at the Air Force side of it, where all the old pads that were inactive are now being reactivated to companies, small private companies that want to have access to space.
Like via space,
Yes.
Relativity,
Yes.
others out there. Those pads are just basically a pad, just a
Yes.
flat pad, and they bring their own
We bring it,
equipment out there.
And then the space station, when it goes down here in the next decade, and when it's not being used, they're depending on several companies right now are going to build their own private space stations.
Yep.
And we'll using those. So it's turning more over to a commercial environment. So NASA will have at least, probably like we do for the airline industry, they just monitor and set guidelines and rules.
Like the Federal Aviation
Yeah,
Administration.
They have
Aviation.
an FAA for space now. My sister told me I needed to go
Yeah.
to them years ago, but I said,
Do you
no.
agree with that, NASA's in 25 years?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to be around to see it in 25 years, but yeah.
Yeah.
But
Well,
yeah.
I am. How come you aren't? You know, I'm going to be.
I'm surprised I lived this long.
Aren't we all? Indeed, on there.
Yeah, but no, I don't, like he said, I envision them backing out of it
Yes.
even more and more. You know, especially like you look at the settlement of this country, there were people moving west and all that, but when they discovered gold, and now everybody thought the potential to make money, there was a huge movement going west and that. And then, so if they can find a way to market the minerals that are in space to go get them and bring them back and use them in that, you see a whole nother advancement of private companies going to space because they can make money. Private companies are not in it to give it away. They used to say
Correct.
that when SpaceX said, how SpaceX launch all this stuff? You know, I said, for free. I said, they're not doing it for free. I said,
No,
they're
no.
spending their dollars to launch it, and then NASA turns around and pays them once they successfully, you know, delivered cargo to station or something like that. I said, private companies do not stay in business by doing things for free.
During the Apollo program, towards the end of it, I was disappointed that we didn't find gold on the moon or oil. If we had those two on the commodities on there, we would be having cities on the moon by now.
Yes.
Yeah, that's true. We might find some asteroid that's all gold, and
There
And
are,
then-
yeah,
and,
what they know about the astronauts, there's a lot of valuable commodities, but how do you get it back? How do you go mine it? You know?
Exactly.
We don't have a Bruce Willis to go do that. Like,
and that's the stuff of the science fiction writers who
Yeah.
did envision the future the way it is now. Some of our
Yeah.
great
look at
writers.
all the things from them, from the science fiction movies and that, you know, the Buck Rogers and all that, and look at the different things they were using, even you know, the tasers from Enterprise and the different things.
the
that-
communicators.
Yeah,
on
the
Star
communicators
Trek
and all that, you know, that's,
in our hand today.
yeah, so.
Well, we are enjoying this little impromptu conversation. Thank you guys for being here today on our 1000th episode. It's just a miracle, really. I remember when we had the 100th episode,
Yeah.
and the whole staff stormed the room, and it was such a big deal. And we're going to do something special on Leap Day, February 29th, to celebrate Jack Laufsmith's birthday.
Okay.
The great astronaut was born on Leap Day, actually.
Oh, okay.
So Jack, though he's
So
88,
still a real young man
well,
now.
he's celebrated 22 birthdays according to that, but he's 88.
Yeah.
But we're going to have, maybe you all are welcome to stop by, as Marty and I are just going to open up the door and go out in our gallery there. But I can't say enough about having you guys as friends and acquaintances here in our twilight of our lives. Let's face it here. You guys have done something that I could never imagine. I'm jealous of it in many ways, because I would have loved to have gone to an after launch party at Mike McCulley's. The astronaut and then he became the COO of the United Space Alliance. But let's go out with this question, guys, because you were both shuttle workers. What will be the legacy of the space shuttle 25 years from now? We're 12 years past the last launch. What will the legacy, when they think about it? I think Apollo, you're always going to think about Apollo because the moon's always going to be up there. But how about the space shuttle and its 134 really successful missions?
He has a different view, and I have a different view. But for me, based on the people that I have here come through the museum, really what's going to be remembered is Challenger and Columbia.
The tragedies.
The tragedies. That's unfortunate, but that's what people, they gravitate to. And so that's will be the legacy of the shuttle. I wish we could get around that, but truly, it was a great experiment to do what they had envisioned. I think in a long time, and looking back at it, it was something that I always had an issue with, is we could not get the engineers to back off, keep wanting to test more and more and more. And that was drive the cost up extremely, is trying to keep doing this testing while it's here on the ground. In fact, the Columbia, the first launch, I don't know if we would ever have launched if it was just up to the engineers, because they were having a heyday retesting and testing all this and learning how to stuff work, by the way. But they would always let's try this and see what happens. Let's try this and see what I can learn. And they just never could get out of that mode. As engineers, that's what we want to do, is test our equipment, and we'll test it till it fails. So anyway,
Right.
But that's my theory of what the legacy will be.
And
Terry,
that-
what do you think the
and
legacy of the
that
shuttle
also,
will be?
to add on to what he was talking about, the STS-1. But after we lost Columbia, they went back and analyzed it, and everything. We determined exactly what happened in it, and then to go out. Now they had all these recommendations, and they kept going on and on. And I went to Washington, and I told them up there. I went up there for an award, but I told them, I said, no. I said, you have to say we're done. We need to return to flight. We got to quit listening to all these different universities and all these different companies saying, well, you need to try this, you need to try that. I said, they've never built the ship. They've never been around the ship. They don't know what they're asking for. It's not reasonable. They would, when they would come into the orbital processing facilities, I said, have you ever seen one before? No. But we're going to design this. I said, it's not going to work. I said, we'll never get off the ground with all the stuff you want to put on to make it safe. I said, it's never designed to be hit. You cannot hit it, so you just have to do that. But when I was in Washington and got introduced to the NASA administrator, and he says, well, what's the feeling on the floor? I said, someone in charge needs to tell us enough. We now need to put them back together and return to flight. And he said, you're right. And he said, and I'm the guy that has to say that, and I'm not ready to say it yet. I said, but you need to stop all this. What if we do this? What if we do that? I said, we know what we need to do. We just need to put it
And
back
they kept
together.
wanting to add more oversight by outside committees to come down and go over all of what we've done, which basically just slows the program down. And my approach that I used, and with my contractor, we talked about this. If you're going to add something to make it value added. It has to give us an improvement of something. We don't do it just for the heck of it. and you're taking away resources that should be working on it to do some other things that didn't do anything to improve the process. And so we fought very hard to keep that from happening. And we lost most of the battles, by the way, but we did try to cut down that type of especially after Challenger, they brought in a lot more management. And then after Columbia, I looked at some of the reports, and they were really going to load NASA down with a tremendous amount of oversight that just would have just stagnated the system.
And worse than that, oversight that didn't grow up in the space industry.
Yeah.
You bring in outsiders who know nothing about what you're doing, and they come in and say, well, you ought to be able to do this in this time frame. You don't understand, this is manned flight. We can't just go change something because you think there's something out there better. And they didn't understand the concept of, no, this requires years and years of testing. But I never tracked the number of modifications on the fleet after the Columbia incident, but after Challenger. And again, both our incidents, well, we lost orbiters in that. Neither one of them was the fault of the orbiter. It was the fault of something else that caused us to lose them. Well, we did over 800 modifications on the rest of the vehicles, 800 per vehicle after Challenger before we returned to flight. And like I say, I didn't track Columbia after post-Columbia.
So you're saying the legacy's short. It'll be forgotten.
Only because of one other thing, that Challenger, they will talk about that.
They'll talk about
And
the
say,
tragedies.
you have people that'll say, I don't like the shuttle because it was so dangerous, and they'll mention Challenger and Columbia. Even though the vehicle itself was an absolutely beautiful vehicle. Rockwell with JSC built a very stout, reliable vehicle. It just that the SRBs and the ET tank had issues with it that caused the shuttle to be destroyed. If it wasn't for those two elements, we would still be flying the shuttle today.
And the shuttle did all the things that the original designers envisioned it doing, and it did a lot of things that they'd never even imagined, that it pulled it together and managed to accomplish all these other tasks. And it pretty amazing vehicle, and you know, it was built, you know, it went over cost an original build and that, but everything that you sell to the government, if you tell them exactly what you think it's going to cost in the long run, they're never approve it. But
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. Well, guys, I appreciate that insight there. We have other questions there, Selvin?
Well, Steve J says one of the best shows ever, and I agree.
Oh,
But we have
thank you, Steve Jokums. He's up at the Lake County Spaceport on the shores of Lake Michigan up there.
We have a kind of interesting question. It says, are any of your spouses interested in space? My spouse is bored with anything space related.
My dad worked the Apollo program and then the shuttle.
Yeah.
And my mom could never understand the terminology when we would talk, you know, work and that. She just couldn't understand. Now, my wife actually worked out on the orbiter from 1979 to 1986. Yeah. So, after the Challenger incident, she took a voluntary layoff. So, yeah.
How about you? How's your wife
would
tolerate the space business?
Well, she was, I don't know if she was really interested in it. She knew what I did. I'd come home and I never really did go over everything that happened to me that day. And she really basically never understood what I did. Because I, you know, you come home and I just want to lead work at work, and I just didn't bring that into the family environment at the time. If they asked a question, that would answer it, but I didn't do anything. She's not into politics or anything like that, so I can't watch any of the news media too much. She gets
See, my wife is into politics.
Yeah.
She watches it all the time, and
Yeah.
I watch the History Channel and the Military Channel and that. But and people can't understand how I did it, but you know, I took care of work items at work. When I went home, I didn't talk work, and when I was at work, I didn't talk home. So I said,
That was a
one
good-
place
good
I
way to do it.
concentrated. Yeah. And then
Yeah, we
people say,
we asked you when you're on the show the other day,
yeah.
Terry, what kept you up at night? And
No,
you said
nothing.
nothing.
No.
You didn't think about work.
Nope.
Or didn't bring it home.
No, unless I was out hunting all night. So
Yeah.
Now, I thought about it, but I just didn't pass it on. I just, sat there
Yeah.
at night trying to figure out what we needed to do.
yeah, I worked with engineers that would do that, and they'd say, "Oh, I didn't get any sleep last night. I was working on this and that." I
Yeah.
said, "Turn that off."
Well, what's next? Two men here that worked on Apollo going to the moon, and then you both worked on the shuttle building the International Space Station. There's some legacies that'll be carried on, like the Hubble Space Telescope,
yes.
and all the Europeans and Canadians that went to space.
All the other 40 countries that got
Denmark
to go to
forever, and
space.
Belgium will always
Yeah.
revere their astronauts that went to space, even 50 years from now, I think.
And hopefully
Uh,
one day they'll recognize the benefits that we get from everything we learn for space.
Which, in my mind, is about everything we touch today in society.
One way or another, it is true. It started with the Apollo program. Well, Jack, Mercury, and Gemini started that concept of what we do for the space program will work its way into the everyday American's life.
Especially the medical advances.
Oh, we just go on and on, but
I don't know.
we've gone on long enough here on our 1000th episode, and some great input from two of our favorite and very popular guests on Stay Curious. Personally, to me, thank you both for being my friend,
Okay.
and always, I know both of you are always talking about the American Space Museum in your daily life there, and bringing us great quality people all the time. And I just want to shake your hands and just say, I hope
Thanks
we
for
can
having
continue
us.
this relationship
And I
here.
just want to point out, it was the best thing that happened to the museum when you came by 4 years ago, and stopped just to see what was going on and never left.
Well, thank you very much. I am a very blessed man, and we've had a lot of fun. We've had the shuttle scroll here that a few astronauts and space workers and so forth have autographed. It's been a great ride, and we're going to continue this ride, and hopefully over the next few months take Stay Curious to a new level. We're going to broadcast it on a new platform where it's easier for Marty and I to do some of the things that we find hard to do. Selvin, thank you for pinch hitting today and embracing the show here. He's been a great asset to us. So any parting thoughts from either one of you?
No, just continue what you're doing,
Thank you.
and maybe we'll have a 2000s here in a few years.
Well,
Look
that
forward
would
to
be would mean yes, that would be great.
Just
That would be great, and that would mean that we're all healthy and wise, and maybe a little bit wealthy.
and
because-
maybe I'll get some more gumbo in March.
Well, all right,
That's
that's,
my next
that's
trip.
right, that's right. Because Terry's bringing me gumbo from Louisiana. His daughter Rebecca there, and your son Travis. Best to them as see they become part of our show, just like so many other people
Yes.
have become part of the
Yeah,
show,
they
like all
enjoyed
of our
being
great
on
guests
the
out
show,
there.
so.
And we're not rattling off a bunch of names today of people who were there. We're going to do a special program tomorrow. We're going to have Jonathan Ward in here. Jonathan wrote this book with Mike Leinbach. As Mike said, he did all the heavy work. He also wrote a book about Eileen Collins that's being turned into a documentary called Space Woman.
Oh, good.
And Jonathan also is an astronomer, and he does tours on some of those cruise lines in Europe. And Jonathan, thank you for reaching out and wanting to be on Stay Curious. And then that'll be Wednesday. Tomorrow, Thursday, we're just going to have an informal program like we did today with some of the guests coming by and saying howdy. And then Friday, I may just do a program recorded by myself that to talk about how this whole thing originated and how grateful we are that you've all embraced Stay Curious. So until tomorrow, when we have Jonathan Ward, a great author and popularizer on social media of all things space. Until we have him tomorrow, I thank you guys from the bottom of my heart, and I thank all of you out there for getting us to episode 1000. And we'll do 1001 tomorrow, as I'm Mark Marquette, and I am anxious to always bridge this space between us. Thank you, guys.
You're welcome.
Sure.